I'm really excited to welcome our next panel to the stage, or to the front of the room. These are all projects related to issues of gender, issues of community. So on this panel, presenting, we will have Taja from the University of Pennsylvania, Tania Ortiz from Syracuse University, Jacinta Fernandes-Brough from Swarthmore College, Kameo Latortue from Guttman Community College, and Shima, Brennen, and Rajvi Desai are one of our two teams from Columbia University. So Taja, I'll go ahead and give you the floor.
Hi everyone, I'm Taja, and this summer I went to Kutch for my reporting project. And Kutch is a district situated in the northwestern corner of India's Gujarat state. It's a massive desert area, and Kutch's moderately populated metropolitan areas are peppered in between vast expanses of salt deserts. And dozens of diverse communities call Kutch home, some Hindu, some Muslim, some indigenous, some from Afghanistan and Pakistan, some nomadic. What unites Kutch, however, is its heritage of craftswork. It would be difficult to walk down a street in Kutch without noticing the meticulously hand-dyed dupattas of Kutchi women, block-printed tablecloths of the damakas, handmade bells hanging from the Lohar's animals' necks, or the mirrored embroidered vests of the Rabaris. With over 22 distinct crafts, Kutch is a prolific center of craftswork in India and arguably in the world. And apart from being striking visually and an impressive technical feat, craft is also an inseparable part of these communities' identities. Apart from their traditional pastoralist livelihoods, craft was their primary activity, practiced in community at the end of the day. The Ahirs, for example, a Hindu community, incorporate motifs of Krishna into their embroidery. The Jat community incorporate desert flowers into theirs, so it's uniquely special for each group. For the nomadic Rabaris, it was a symbol of belonging. Even hundreds of miles from home, you'd be able to tell which community they were from, just from their style of embroidery. In the past few decades, however, the world of craftswork has changed dramatically. A series of natural disasters, including droughts, a cyclone, and a devastating earthquake in 2001, created severe economic instability. It forced nomadic and pastoralist communities to settle down, sell their animals, and look for wage labor jobs to stay afloat. With no animals or assets, women and their families had to sell what was often the only other thing that belonged to them, their craft. So a few years later, and craftswork has become almost entirely commercialized. For craftswomen, a practice once done for themselves is now sold almost entirely for others, branded as a handmade luxury product and sold around the world. So this summer, I stayed in Kutch to report on this shift and to report on how craftswomen's lives have changed over the past few decades. And we frequently speak of cultures dying. So you may have heard that statistic that once every 14 days, a language dies. And I think there's always an undercurrent of fear of culture becoming obsolete in our quote-unquote modern world. But I wanted to investigate what happens in the in-between space when a culture stays alive, despite everything, to see all the changes of this modern world. And despite the constant change and tumult in Kutch, craftswork is still being practiced. Craftswork NGOs are working to catalog the craft to preserve it, and people across the globe are wearing it as it's now being sold. And even if the nature of craftswork has changed, the women I interviewed were happy that they're earning money from their work and therefore still able to practice it. But at the same time, in the transition from cultural heritage to commercial product, there's something that has been fundamentally lost about the craft. And women told me that what made craftswork so special was the identity that they gained from it. The fact that they could make it together and wear it together and ultimately show that they belong together. And instead of, again, their pastoralist livelihoods, they now depend on money they earn from daily wage labor. So wage from craftswork has allowed them to continue practicing their craft, but they don't have the time or money to practice for themselves. Most of what they embroider goes on to be sold. And as a result, their clothing is different now, using mass-produced fabric instead of hand-dyed, hand-woven, hand-embroidered fabric. And I found that craftwork has become more of an expression of economic need instead of an affirmation of community and identity. And class anxieties also play into this. A woman would not even be able to afford to buy her own work. Many crafts workers are lower class and caste, and they're paid around 300 rupees a day for just for days of work, which is the equivalent of around $3.50. Meanwhile, finished pieces can go anywhere between 300 to 200 US dollars, and they're marketed as luxury and bought by upper class women. And even the physical pieces are different. Consumers are now seeking Western clothes. So walk into a craft store or look online and you'll find trendy embroidered handbags, jeans, and jackets that are suitable for a Western audience, but very different from the traditional heart of the craft. And one archivist working to catalog embroidery traditions tells me when women did it for themselves, their embroidery was smaller and stitched more lovingly. Now they're just trying to complete it. And if craft and embroidery once reflected cultural identity and tradition, we could say it now reflects the demands and desires of the market economy. In some ways, we can say that craftwork is still genuine, but on the other hand, what I found in Kutch is that, and what the women have told me, that the market has appropriated craftwork, softening its cultural importance by only spitting out the parts it deems worthy of reproduction. And for crafts workers, an identity perhaps still exists through their art, but it's one mediated by the market. And a question I had on my mind throughout my trip was, how do we affirm our identities if nothing belongs to us? And some women I spoke to, like Rabari Madhavan in the middle, were ambivalent and often nostalgic about their past. She says, life was better before. We had assets, we had animals. Now we only have enough to fill our stomachs. So if I had to impart a main message to you from this reporting, it would be that the issue of maintaining cultural heritage is not just one of death or rebirth. And I learned a lot about women's lives, the environment, about a constantly changing world that has affected everything from the global economic order to the stitches in a woman's dress. But more than a struggle between life and death, it was more apparent that this was a struggle of identity and belonging. And one woman tells me, we have an identity from our craft. Our traditions are disappearing, and when that happens, we'll lose our identity too. So if we really want to go about maintaining cultural heritage, from what these women have said, we need to figure out what maintaining really means. Commercialization, for example, has at once maintained and endangered the craft and culture tied into it. So ultimately, what will become of one of India's richest and most storied cultural traditions? Ultimately, the future of craftswork depends on the future of craftswomen. Because women aren't getting paid enough for their craft, most of the younger generation is not learning craftswork. They're going into tailoring or farming or things that pay them more and more consistently. But even if these women have been alienated from their work, it's clear they still hold great pride in it. The craft is fighting to stay alive, as it has for decades now, but young people are inevitably being pulled in other directions. And the women have shown resilience, I think, in the face of change. One of them told me, we don't like these changes, but we're not sad about it. This is the modern life. The older craftswomen believe that if the legacy of craftswork is going to continue into the future, girls need to feel economically and socially supported in their work. So I'll end the presentation with a quote from a young Rabari girl I spoke to. Her name is Geeta, she's 17, and she looks very different from the older women in her community. Her hair is loose, and she wears sneakers and sweatpants and polyester t-shirts. She wakes up at 5 every morning to take care of her family, her house, her animals, to cook and clean. She also goes to school, and she's the first in her family to do so. And Geeta's mother taught her embroidery from a young age, and she's the only young girl in her village that knows how to do it. She tells me she's never sold her work. I ask her why she still does it. And she says, because I like it. I embroider because I like having something that belongs to me. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tania Ortiz. I'm from Syracuse University. My name is Tania Ortiz. I'm from Syracuse University, and my project is called Ni Una Menos, Mexico's Women Combating Femicide. So just for context, Ni Una Menos is a very symbolic phrase within the Mexican feminist movement. And it translates to not one more, meaning not one more women or girl who fall victim to femicide and or are disappearing. So rather than focusing on why femicide is a problem in Mexico and why it continues to be a problem in Mexico, I decided to focus this project a little bit more on the voices and the people who rally behind the victims and their families. Those are the feminist collectives. So the feminist collectives, they are there because a lot of the judicial institutions and a lot of the agencies that handle cases regarding femicide and gender violence are not necessarily responding to the families, and they're not listening to the needs that they're asking for. So collectives are explaining the legal system, helping them file a case, what happens after a case, explaining to them what resources and rights they have as victims, and also providing psychological, emotional support throughout the whole process, on top of organizing public demonstrations such as protests, hanging up signs with pictures of victims in the middle of the city square, and so on and so forth, as well as social media. And so these activists are often the strongest and the only voices and advocates that these families have. So why should we necessarily care about the work that these women are doing? Last year, documents that were leaked from the National Defense Security in Mexico, they deemed feminist collectives as a danger to society as the same level as organized crime, so think drug cartels, and it's very much a very not balanced comparison because they're two different entities, two different groups, obviously. And so it places them in a very even more vulnerable position than ever before. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about two women that I had the pleasure of speaking to while in Juarez. They're part of the group Red Mesa de Mujeres. They're a very small but mighty group. They work a lot with volunteers, but at its core, it's only 5 people. And so I spoke to Yarida Cortez and Maria Isabel Aguilera, both who do outstanding work for victims and their families. Maria Isabel, she works more on the psychological, emotional help, providing holistic wellness, Socratic seminars, and also just being the shoulder for victims' families, for them to talk through their trauma that they're experiencing. Whereas Yarida Cortez, she is more so in the trenches and going to the prosecutor's offices and making sure the cases are being looked at and also processed correctly and as they should be, and helping victims understand the rights that they have, on top of even gathering evidence before case hearings, which is often work that should be done by prosecutors and investigators for cases like this. I remember Yadira was telling me about how in 2015 she was having to wait outside of a factory until past midnight in order to talk to a potential witness of an attempted femicide that she was helping with, a case that she was accompanying with. And so they're often putting their lives on, they're often doing all this work 24/7. It's not a 9-to-5 job for them. So they're very dedicated to the work that they do. And on top of that as well, Maria Isabel was talking about how she would also get texts and calls from mothers, on certain anniversary dates. So when their daughter disappeared, when their body was found, and their birthdays, family-oriented holidays as well, just so they can have a shoulder to lean on and somebody to talk to. And Maria Isabel is not going to turn those family members away. She's going to talk to them. She's going to listen to them and hear what they're going through, in order for them to kind of get past the trauma. Although they don't necessarily get past losing a daughter or losing a sister. So, and for me, it was really interesting to talk to them in person and being in their space, in their office. Because being there, I can feel how dedicated they were, how passionate they were for the work that they do, And also, there's so many reminders of the work that they do in their office, pictures of victims, posters with phrases such as that, there's ribbons. Those are ribbons of victims and pictures of them. And so also, Yadira and Maria Isabel are both mothers. Actually, both of their kids were in the office while I was talking to them. They're both teenagers, and they're both also really involved in the work that their mothers are doing, and also volunteering, with workshops, taking care of the social media that they have as well. So they're very much, inspiring a younger generation as well to care about this and to do the work and to be the voice of the women who've lost their lives due to femicide. So, despite the kind of negative view the government has on them, they're still gonna do the work regardless because it's important work and it often gets really unnoticed. And that is something I really want to kind of emphasize through this story and through this presentation, is that they're gonna do it regardless, and because they're just trying to follow the mission that they want to do and to seek justice for these cases, no matter how long it takes. So, yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name's Jacinta. I go to Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania. And this summer I reported on the Nigerian women's football team, or soccer for the Americans in the room, and their experiences at the World Cup that was held in Australia. So the Nigerian team has historically been the best in Africa. They've qualified for every edition of the World Cup. They've won 11 African Cup of Nations, and some of their players are ranked among the best in women's football. True to form, they performed very well at this past World Cup. They came in ranked quite a low 45th, and they proceeded to tie Canada, the reigning Olympic champions. They beat Australia, the host nation, and they took England, the eventual runners-up, all the way to extra time and penalties before they eventually exited in the round of 16. But the focus of my article was really what was going on behind the scenes and off the pitch with the team. So before the World Cup, the team signed a contract with the Nigerian Football Federation, the NFF. This was actually the first time in their history that they'd signed a written agreement. Before, everything had been done verbally, with NFF officials quite often going back on their word. So this particular contract stipulated that each player would receive $100 daily camp allowance. They would receive a bonus of $3,000 for winning a game and $1,500 for a tie. A few weeks after this was signed, FIFA made an announcement that every player at the World Cup would receive an appearance fee of $30,000, with the amount increasing after the group stage. This was pretty momentous for women's football. This size of money hasn't really been involved historically. And so after this announcement, actually a few days before the team were due to fly out to Australia, the NFF met with them and basically went back on their contract, saying, actually, we're not going to be paying you this money, because claiming it was somehow included in the money the players were now meant to receive from FIFA. So this sort of issue was essentially put on hold for the tournament as the team focused on the football and playing on the pitch. But after its conclusion, they began working with FIFA Pro, a union for professional footballers, to fight for the payments owed to them, both from this past World Cup and from other tournaments going back across 2 years. Unfortunately, this struggle isn't particularly new for the players on the team. They have a history of holding protests, and the NFF's traditional response is to blacklist the perceived ringleaders. So players can be frozen out of the team indefinitely or for a couple of years, and for those of them that wish to return, there's a common practice of insisting they write apology letters. So they're literally writing an email addressed to senior officials apologizing for their behavior. So, in the words of some of the players themselves that I spoke to, they don't treat us as if we are here to play for our country, they treat us as if we are slaves. Another player said, the Federation will just decide on what they're going to pay players. It could be anything. If you don't fight them, if you don't ask for it, they are never going to pay you. Unfortunately, unpaid wages are just the tip of the iceberg of insufficient support. Other issues are, for example, when they're traveling for international duty, they're usually booked on the cheapest flight, which can involve very long layovers and sleeping at airports. One player said, I was cold, 13 good hours I slept in the airport. when they're training at home in Abuja in Nigeria, the training facilities unfortunately leave a little to be desired for. Another player spoke of how you're not afraid of getting injured when an opposing player tackles you. You're more afraid that the state of the field will hurt you. So when I returned to the US, I was pitching my story, and it was accepted by The Athletic and actually published a couple of weeks ago, which was very exciting for me. And as I reflected on my summer, a couple of takeaways that stood out to me was one interview I had with a player. I'd spoken to a couple already, and they'd been pretty conservative and pretty hesitant in what they were willing to speak with me about. Quite often, a lot of the older players were honestly just tired of speaking about the federation, tired of speaking about things that were never changing. Some others were afraid because, they'd seen teammates of theirs being blacklisted, and they understandably had no desire to put a target on their own backs. But this one player was very willing to speak with me. And after I'd sort of introduced myself and described what I wanted to write my article about, she just kind of went for 20 minutes. She spoke. I was unprompted. I hadn't even asked a question yet. And it was just kind of this outpouring of emotion, of frustration, of her experiences, of changes she wanted to see. And even over a fairly unstable WhatsApp connection, her sort of passion and her frustration was really clear and really came through. And I remember after an hour and a half, when I ended the call and sort of sat back, I thought, I really need to get this article right for this player, if for no other reason. So that's one interview that sticks with me. Another learning process that was interesting was the legal aspect of publishing an article. It was something I'd never really considered before. So when The Athletic accepted it, it went through obviously the editing process there. It'd gone through several rounds. I'd been in contact with my editor, and he said, this is looking good. I'm happy with the shape of it. I'll just send it off to legal. They'll make a few comments, and then we should be good to publish in a couple of days. In hindsight, a few comments was a bit of an understatement on his part. Legal came back with comments on, I think, almost every line of the article. And also, they were in red font and capitalized, which didn't help my heart rate the first time I saw them. But it was clear that a lawyer had gone through, and from the perspective of, if a lawsuit is filed and we have to go to court, would we be able to defend everything that's included in this article? So anything that was vaguely accusatory of the NFF, that was very divisive, she was asking, do we have multiple sources for this? If we have to prove it, what's our evidence? Do we have any documents to back up this claim? And it really made me go back and go through my transcripts and, think through my interviews with the player to really make sure that you have got your facts right, that what you're saying is true. And it was interesting, sort of the tweaks involved in this. So, for example, instead of saying the NFF hasn't paid players, you might say players report that. Or instead of, players say the NFF is corrupt, it's players feel that X, Y, and Z. And so the little changes that were required to meet sort of the legal standards of The Athletic was, I found, a very interesting process to go through. So yeah, those are a few takeaways from my experience this summer. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kameo, and I'm a sophomore at Guttman Community College. And how are you guys doing today? That's great. So my topic is on internalized homophobia and transphobia among Black queer community in New York City. Internalized homophobia, is the involuntary belief by queer and trans people that the dangerous stereotypes about us are true. And some of us queer people project those stereotypes onto one another. I created a podcast where you'll hear from some people that I interviewed. I spoke with Jaleesa, Dejan Valente, and Isaiah Blake. We talked about the fear of feminine behavior among Black gay men. And we're gonna take a listen. You're gonna hear from Jaleesa first. Hello, my name is Kameo Latortue, and I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm 34 years old, first generation Haitian American, and I'm a gay man. And I've become very curious about how gay men experience internalized homophobia and transphobia. which is a conscious and subconscious negative reaction towards people within the LGBTQIA community. We discuss the impact of internalized homophobia and transphobia amongst Black gay men. The first person I spoke with is
Julissa, it's spelled Julissa, last name Vera.
She is a Black trans woman from the Bronx who graduated from Lehman College with her undergraduate degree in 2022 and is currently enrolled at the CUNY Grad Center for a PhD in sociology. We talked about her experience as a Black trans woman interacting with Black gay men.
Being that, trans women aren't always included in queer spaces, specifically Black queer spaces, because being Black and gay is bad enough. Being Black and trans is like blasphemy. It's like the biggest, like the worst one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so being a Black trans woman, I don't ever really feel super safe in the Black queer spaces. I feel like I'm being looked at as a Black gay man. A lot of the times in these spaces, I feel like I am a sex object that Black queer men only see as another object for other Black men that they find attractive.
I asked Julissa in what ways does she think that Black gay men can be transphobic towards Black trans women.
It becomes misogynoir, right? Where yes, we're both Black, yes, we're both queer, but you're still a man, so you have some type of power over me being a woman. And that's more what it comes down to, that misogynoir, that I need someone to be able to put down, to be able to feel like I'm up.
So that's the clip. You can hear the rest of it online. But the reason why I chose to talk about this issue is because this doesn't affect just Black and brown queer people. It affects us all. And honestly, I want to live in a world where people can be themselves without ridicule and shame. And if we just can take the time to just learn to love on one another and be more accepting, this will probably be a better place. So that's it.
One second.
Hi, I'm Shima Brennen.
And I'm Rajvi Desai. We're two trans filmmakers of color who met at the Columbia Journalism School in 2021. And then we really bonded over our desire to tell radical stories about trans communities of color.
In a media world that sensationalizes and trivializes Black trans people's death and trauma, for us, what was radical for us was to center joy, kinship, and family, which are the bedrock for Black and brown trans people in this country.
So in the winter of 2021, we met Mother Latortue, a Black trans leader who had dedicated her life to this radical vision. She had been running an advocacy and service organization called the Brooklyn Ghost Project for Black and brown trans people in Crown Heights for 7 years. So let us introduce you. A long video. Okay. How do I press play? Oh, play? Nope. Sorry.
Okay, are we ready? Yeah. 3, 2. There's currently a war on Black and brown trans identities in America.
Meanwhile, Black trans-led grassroots organizations like Brooklyn Ghost Project are forced to take on this horrific injustice while being underfunded, under-equipped, and under-resourced.
Again. Unequipped. Unequipped is not a word.
What I keep on saying?
Under-equipped.
Unequipped. Oh, unequipped. Okay.
Unequipped. However, we need your help.
Wait.
What's the speed of "We Need Your Help"? Somebody say it.
We need your help.
All right, I got it. We cannot depend on sex work as an end game. I'm not judging nobody. If you work in sex work, girl, more power to you. Be careful out there in the streets. At the same time, you got to be thinking, saving, and motivating to get out of that. You don't want to be the girl sitting out there watching every car pass you to the young girl. Okay, ready? I would do like check fraud and receipt changing to make money. As soon as I land in New York, I get sick. And I go down to the hospital in the emergency room and they tell me, Miss Collins, you have kidney failure. And if you didn't come in here within the next few days, you could have not woken up. And then I realized that, girl, you were a fucking scam artist. That could have been your story. So in that hospital bed, I changed my whole motherfucking life. When I finally was released from the hospital, the first thing I did was enroll in college. Education was a lifesaver for me.
Of course, where you get that ice from?
I say if you show up Thursday without doing the homework and you haven't called either one of us for help, it's gonna be a problem. That means you don't give a shit. That is your superpower as a trans non-binary person. You can transform and be whatever you need to be when you need to be it. You don't have to be what you have been. You can be what you will become.
99% of the people in our film have seen their friends die by the age of 35, either by murder, drug overdose, or neglect from institutions. Mother Travius founded the Brooklyn Ghost Project to change these stories for the people who are still living.
And GHOST stands for Guiding and Helping Others Survive Transition, which in turn is kind of another way of saying the title of our film, Motherwit.
So Motherwit is an oral tradition passed down by matriarchs and Black communities. Its wisdom is dynamic and ever-changing to really suit the needs of future generations as they fight for survival and liberation in a world that denies Black people access to power, safety, and dignity.
So when Black trans people are denied access to their homes and families, they also lose the access to this motherwit that they need. So they create chosen families where matriarchs like Mother Latravius fill that very necessary void.
And when we met her, Mother Latravius, she was super frustrated with her children. She felt like they depended too much on her and her organization and weren't depending on themselves enough. So for her, her goal was to get them to dream big, for them to think about their own success and live long on their own terms.
And all this while she's attending dialysis 3 times a week, a process that has left her sick and weak for more than a decade. But at 38, she has lived longer than most Black trans people she has ever known.
So for us, we wanted to understand her specific brand of motherhood and its impacts on the community. So we followed 3 of her chosen daughters.
I come here to learn. Even though I get here late sometimes, but I still make sure that I make it because I need this.
I dropped out in 12th grade. I wanted to grow up too fast. Nobody never really asked me for a high school diploma or anything. But, you know, as you get older,
certain jobs that I really wanted that were comfortable for me. And I really wanted the job, but I got turned away for the GED. So I said, you know what, it's time for me to get this shit together.
Kesha is saying she's ready to take the test. Actions speak louder than words, but she is saying that she's ready, which is a big step.
I'm the only Black trans woman on my own campus. When I first started college, I was just transition. So I was just like a lost puppy trying to figure out who I was. And then now I transitioned, and it's been the best experience of my life. Like, I am that girl.
Yes, you are.
I am that girl. So I would dream to be in a ballroom scene. I remember the first time I went to a ball and the vibe and the energy was different. I felt like I belonged for the first time.
I try to always tell the girls that even if it's today, you are absolutely the most drop-dead gorgeous, mouth-open, beautiful thing to ever grace, the Pride Center. There's gonna be somebody prettier. There's gonna be somebody younger. You're not gonna look that way forever.
No.
Plan for a different day. You wanna live long enough to get old and ugly.
Right.
Out of all of my children, Ijara is like my protege. Everything that I can, I wanna teach her so that if I am unable, there is someone here.
This is my going to 4th year being clean and sober. When I started working for Latortue, I worked my way up. I ended up in MCNY. You get your associates and your bachelor's in 8 semesters. I don't even know how the hell I manage everything. I just get up every day and I just do what I do.
My fear now is that when it's all said and done, what I'm building won't stand without me. I realize I am everything that I'm building, and if I'm not here, it's most likely to not be.
Mother Travius was constantly worried about running out of time. A year ago, almost to this date, she passed away, leaving her family alone, shocked, and heartbroken. Her death also put in jeopardy the future of the Brooklyn Ghost Project.
It also changed us and our position in the community. Once filmmakers and observers, we were invited in to be both mourners and caretakers of her legacy. In the past year, Mother Latravius's worst fears have played out. The Brooklyn Ghost Project has run very low on money and has lost its center in education. But her community is steadfast and strong and determined to keep her legacy alive.
Kesha dropped out of the GED classes, but she's determined to go back. Ketsia is a paralegal now with the Brooklyn's DA's office and wants to rededicate herself to activism. Ijira became the executive director of the Ghost Project after Mother Latravius's death, but without support or funding, she had to step down to take care of her own health.
We continue to film with the community, and with the support of orgs like the Pulitzer Center and Sundance, we hope to fulfill the promise that we made to Mother Latravius, that we take her story and vision to Black and brown trans communities around the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, if our panelists want to go ahead and make your way up to our table here, we can get started with our Q&A portion. This will give you all a second to start thinking of your questions. All right, I'll first start by asking if any of our panelists have questions for each other.
I do. How did you meet Mother Latrice, I can't pronounce her name, but how did you meet her?
Me meeting Mother Latravius actually came out of my own loneliness and isolation during COVID-19. So a lot of ways that Black trans people meet and have fellowship and community in New York City is through events. And so with COVID, that completely shut down a lot of the ways that we had community together. So that coupled with George Floyd's murder, there was a lot of butting of heads between Black cishet people and Black trans people in terms of whose Black Lives Matter. And so it became pretty evident that there wasn't necessarily a space that I felt like I belonged in. There were pieces of my Black identity that was okay in Black spaces, but as soon as my queer identity or my trans identity was brought into the picture, I no longer belonged. So I really started thinking about chosen family and what it meant to like sit at the nexus and be around people who loved me for all of my identity. And that led me to the Brooklyn Ghost Project.
Any other questions from our panelists?
Okay, this is for Jacinta. Did you speak to any soccer fans, and what was, I guess, their general reaction to how the players are being treated, especially because women's soccer is so important for other women?
So unfortunately, I didn't get to speak to any Nigerian fans because I traveled to Australia and wasn't in Nigeria. And unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to speak with them. But I did wind up actually speaking to one of my classmates at college who's from Nigeria and had been back home that summer. And who was actually pleasantly surprised that I happened to be writing an article about it. And she said it was really nice that it was the first time she'd been home and there'd been talk of the women's team, sort of, she was back in Lagos, and how they were doing, and the fact that there was a tournament on. And so she's around our age, but she was saying it's the first time she's really noticed talk of the women's national team, because obviously football is huge in most of Africa, including Nigeria, and the men's team is, it's like a national event when they play. But the fact that the women's game is starting to creep into public conversation was nice to hear from her.
All right, I'm going to open it up to audience questions for now, but definitely feel free to flag me down if you all want to ask a question of one another. All right, Joy, I'll come to you. Oh, and if our audience members, if you could please say your name before you ask your question and what school you're coming from, that'd be awesome.
Hello, my name is Joy. I'm coming from George Washington University right here. And my questions for the last two presentation, I was wondering if you've encountered trans men and if there's any opposing difference or similarities in terms of perceptions or opinions or story in any way. Thank you.
I'll go first. I'll be honest with you, no, I haven't. Just in general, I really don't interact with other Black trans men, and not because I have a thing against them, but I just don't, or haven't really had the opportunity to. So yeah.
Very quickly, I guess the answer is a little similar because the Brooklyn Ghost Project, they are obviously open to anybody who wants to come and be in community with them, but it is a primarily mostly Black trans women and some brown trans women space, and I think they like to keep it that way to a certain extent, not to be exclusionary, but yeah.
I'll also say that just when I watch the news or just looking at things, you don't really ever hear things about violence against Black trans men, and I think that's because at the end of the day they're men. You hear more about women, and obviously we live in a country where women's rights are being stripped as we speak, so Black trans women are literally at the bottom of the barrel. So yeah.
Other audience questions?
Hello, my name is Simeon Hardley. I'm from Southern Illinois University. I have a question. and I don't want to butcher the name. The last presenter, the group there. How do you guys navigate the story post mother? What's her name? Mother.
Latravius.
Yeah, her passing. How are you guys navigating the story now? And you also mentioned Sundance, so do you guys plan on entering that as like a documentary film? Thank you.
Yeah, her death definitely hit us extremely hard because it was unexpected, even though she did have kidney failure. And I think that one of the last interviews that we had with her, the clip that you all saw with her talking about her legacy, I think that became the central focus of what we're working on. Before, it was very much a story about a mother pushing her children towards education. And after her passing, it turned into a story about a mother pushing her children to education and also trying to teach her children how to survive, and how does that information get transferred from one generation to the next. So now this is a multi-generational story that we're working on, and we are hoping to make it a 75 to 90 minute feature film, and we're still in production on it, hoping to finish in the spring of 2024, and then to be in post-production and be done and ready for festivals and distribution in 2025.
And I'll just add a little thing. So in terms of just like emotionally navigating this space, like grief is weird and not linear and hard. And I think both of us really agreed. I mean, we weren't also mentally in a space to think about the film, because like we love her. And so yeah, I mean, we didn't really put the film in front of our people. We didn't, they invited us to film at her memorial, but more than that, we haven't really been like, hey, how do you feel now? It has been very organic conversations. I mean, we show up quite regularly without cameras with them because we realized that navigating her absence was something that we needed to do in community, and the film is secondary, tertiary, whatever. To the relationship that we have with them.
I'm going to head back here.
Hi, my name is Blessed. I'm coming from Hopkins University. My question is provoked by the last two presenters, but I'd honestly love to hear from all or any of the panelists regarding this question, because I think that you all had such emotional stories to share. The subject matter was sensitive, and you were targeting vulnerable communities. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to the rapport building process for your sources, how you guys went about that to evoke, such powerful emotions, which I think you all beautifully displayed in your presentations.
Well, I'll go first. I actually met Dijon and Isaiah at an event in Park Slope in Brooklyn. And we were just chatting, and talking. And I told them that this is what I was working on. And they wanted to be a part of it. Surprisingly, I just thought I was just coming up with this, topic in my head. But a lot of Black gay men and Black queer people, Black and brown queer people feel this way, where it's hard to develop relationships, create friendships with other Black and brown queer people because we are so afraid to be ourselves. And I met Jaleesa at a school event, and we chopped it up, we talked for a little bit, and I told her, this is what I'm working on. And she was like, girl, let me be a part of it. So yeah, that's how I met everyone.
Yeah, I actually ended up writing a paper on this very thing. I think specifically for the community that we're working with, they're very distrustful of journalists. Journalists have parachuted in and out for a really long time and told stories that they didn't necessarily think were 100% true or have dead named or misreported. So I had sat in the community for about 10, maybe about 10 years before actually starting this with Rajvi. And I'd heard a lot of the kind of discontent with how they felt journalists reported on them. So we both came in under the guise that we were guests in somebody else's house. We were listeners. I came in under the assumption that they weren't going to trust me in the beginning, and they had no reason to. And it was my job to sit and be a listener and take in what was going on more than it was for me to actually talk. And so it meant, like Rajvi said, coming without a camera. It meant being really open and transparent with what our process was and what was going on and where we were and funding. It meant using trauma-informed reporting, even in our interviews, so that way we didn't hit any touch points that would set our people off to make them think that they couldn't trust us. It meant putting their feelings first before the actual story and for them to see us as a community member who wanted to just amplify what they were saying versus us coming in as outsiders who were going to leave. They needed to know that we were going to stick around for us to build that trust and for them to open up. Because a lot of journalists have come in and out of the Brooklyn Ghost Project, and they are so attuned to it that they know exactly what they need to say. They know the B-roll that they need to get. They know what type of color you want. They can give you all of that. But if you're trying to tell a story that's deeper than that, you need to sit with them and prove that you have earned their trust versus automatically thinking that it's something they should give you right off the bat.
Any other panelist comments on just connecting with your sources or building trust in general?
I could also respond to this. So initially when I started reporting, a lot of the workers at women's rights NGOs that I was kind of using to like build rapport with the women warned me they're very savvy and like they're going to give you very clipped answers. Like they have been interviewed before and journalists have spoken to them and you won't really be able to get anything out of them. And initially, I mean, I thought like, okay, how bad could it really be? But then I would go there and I'd be like, oh, this change has happened. How do you feel about it? And they would just go, oh, I feel fine. Next question. So I realized I wouldn't really be able to just ask them how they're feeling. I had to actually spend time with them and let that come up. And then a week into my reporting, a cyclone hit, and a lot of the women lost electricity, they lost running water, food. So I was still going to their houses, but it was under like a very different context. It was more like, come in, you're a guest in my home, and I want to like, we went through something traumatic and something difficult together, and let's take care of each other. So it turned into me just going into their houses, spending time with them, with their daughters a lot of the time, and building trust. Because as everyone has said, like people can be very distrusting of journalists who have kind of manipulated, or I should say like exploited the power imbalance and just kind of seen journalism as like an extractive activity instead of a collaborative activity, so.
Other questions? Oh, Layla, I'll come to you.
Thanks. As was said, my name is Layla. I go to Hunter College in New York City. And my question is for Taja and Tania. Hopefully I said your names correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong. But I was curious about what gets lost in translation when you're reporting in a different language. My native language is Arabic, and I know that when I translate into English, it's not as beautifully said as it is said in like the native language. So I was just wondering, how did you guys try to figure that out when you're reporting, and how did you translate it back where the beauty of the word is still there? Yeah.
I actually struggled with this when writing my story, mainly because I'm a native Spanish speaker. So all my notes in my notebook are all written in Spanish, just so my bilingual brain can process it. So when it came to making sure when it came to translating, I tried to translate as accurate as possible or as roughly as I understand it. So the impact of of what they said in Spanish still remains in English. I often had to call my parents just so I can make sure that I still keeping that essence, mainly because there are certain words that I would understand what they mean in Spanish, but not necessarily know the exact translation in English. So that was definitely something that I had to navigate in terms of writing the story and making sure that what the feminist collectives, these activists were telling me, still has that same impact in the way that they told me in Spanish. So, yeah.
Yeah, for me, this was definitely one of the most challenging things I had to go through in reporting. I do not speak Hindi or Gujarati or Kutch, which were the three languages that I was dealing with. And my translator also did not speak Kutch. So there were certain interviews where it was getting translated like 3 times over. And by the end, it was like a game of telephone where you didn't really know what you were getting on the other end. So initially, I was like, oh my God, I'm like never gonna figure out what these women are trying to tell me. Like, there's no way I can have a conversation with them. But it turned into a process of like building a relationship with my translator and with if people were also translating for him. And then I guess I like would write down what I understood they said and then say it back and say like, is this accurate? But I think that's definitely difficult. Even if you're reporting the same language that you speak, like things are gonna get lost in translation. Like how you view the story is not how the story is. So that was definitely like something very difficult that I had to traverse, but yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle. I'm from Northwestern in Qatar. Firstly, amazing stories, everyone. But my question is for Taha. Your story was really interesting. So I just wanted to ask you, like, what your thought process was and how you got to this story.
So my family's from India on my dad's side, and I have grown up around crafts and like the products of these craftswomen's work, whether it's like tapestries or clothes. And it was just such like a constant in my life that I never really thought about it. It was just, this is how it is. Like these are these beautiful hand embroidered clothes, but I never really thought about what goes into them. So I guess I was just like curious about meeting the people behind the work and seeing, what are the issues that they're facing. Like clearly I am living thousands of miles away from them, but I'm wearing something that they've been traditionally doing for hundreds of years. So how did this happen? Like how did this end up in my closet? So I think I had like a connection existing, but it was very tenuous and like I was even unsure of what that connection even was, how it got to be there. So yeah, that's what introduced me to it and then like what drove me to the project as well.
I had a question for you as well. I was curious about, you mentioned that the women are making these pieces and they get paid approximately $350 a day, and the pieces go for much more. Who are they employed by, and can you speak to kind of the power dynamics there and how those power dynamics are impacting the craft?
Yeah. So it can be kind of complicated and different depending on which community you're working with, but at least for the women I spoke to, what would happen is that they're part of like a producer collective. So it's a group of women in a community that work together and they hire like their own managers and their own leaders in the producer collective who handle like the business economic side of things. And then these people go back to them and they say, okay, like, we have a buyer from Fab India, for example, which is like one of the major retailers of craftswork. And we need like 3 pieces finished by the end of the month. Can you do it? And a lot of times women will say yes. So they have some agency, but it's also like they need the money that they're receiving from craftswork. So there's some pressure that they need to complete everything and that they need to like just fulfill all the orders coming in. So I would say that this producer collective puts a little bit of distance between the women and the more exploitative, like larger companies that are selling it across the world, which has proven to be good. I think like they have some agency and they have control over what they do or do not do. But at the end of the day, like it's the big companies that are setting the market price, that are like setting what consumers want, so the style of like clothes or whatever they're producing. So there's some sort of distance, but it's still proved to be difficult.
Hi, I'm Lalani. I'm with American University, or recently graduated from there. My question is for Tania. I was wondering, you were mentioning kind of the risks to women you were speaking with, as their job is kind of like a 24/7 thing, and they could be targeted by people. Did you ever feel like you were, in at risk, and how did you navigate that?
While I was in the field, I went to both Ciudad Juarez and Tijuana. I didn't necessarily feel like I was at risk, essentially, but I was really hyper vigilant when I was walking around. I was fortunately accompanied by family members who were familiar with the area, which made me feel a bit safe, but also, again, being hyper vigilant and being aware of being in those cities, because Tijuana has now become kind of one of the more violent cities border cities in Mexico in the past few years. So, and that's like in my backyard. I'm from San Diego, so I've gone back and forth, as a kid. But now it's like it's different from when I was younger to now. But I was just always making sure of being aware of my surroundings when I was in those 2 cities. So, yeah.
Panelists, one more time. And thank you for all of your questions. And congrats to everyone who presented today. I know a lot of you had really long travel days, so great job. You've all done amazing. I'm going to hand it back to Kim for a few notes before we disperse.
Thanks, Livy. And thank you to the panel. That was excellent. Great presentations.